And now we're moving on to our second panel, discussion panel, which is going to be titled The Circular Block, or Reinventing the MICRORAYON. And for this panel, I would like to invite our curators, Lydia and Areti, to the stage, and also Kaidi Põldoja and Maria Derlõš. And, oh yeah, and Sonia as well. Sonia? Here you are. Sorry, lights. But anyways, please come to the stage. I'll do a quick introduction of what we're going to be talking about in the meantime. So essentially, we're going to be speaking about division competition right now for an hour. And division competition has historically been one of the main parts of the Architecture Biennale, so just Tallinn Architecture Biennale. So just like the curatorial exhibition or the symposium that you're in right now, the vision competition has been, I think, with us ever since TAB was founded. For this year's brief was to explore how we convert waste into matter and how, let's say, the metabolism in the built environment works and taken as an example a specific area of Tallinn. This year, Lasnamäe was chosen to be the site. Lasnamäe is the, let's say, the largest housing district of Tallinn. About 1/4 of the entire population of Tallinn lives in Lasnamäe. The district is a Soviet development, so it was constructed between the 70s and 90s when the Soviet Union collapsed. Since the Union collapsed, it didn't just nicely finish, but collapsed. The district itself is also unfinished. So if you go, well, once we go to see the opening of the works, the opening of the exhibition of the works, then you'll see the environment, and then we'll have at some point the slides also for you to kind of get a glimpse of what Lasnamäe looks like. But basically, yeah, it's a very Soviet, modernistic sort of housing district with a lot of people, with traffic cutting through the very middle of the district. But in certain aspects, it's unfinished. So, for example, the playground, some of the public infrastructure has never been finished. If you look at the map of Lasnamäe, then you'll see that it kind of is composed of cells. So MICRORAYON is the cell of the district. A MICRORAYON is designed or is initially purposed to be, let's say, a semi-self-sustaining piece of a city, where you would have the school, the necessary infrastructure, pretty much everything except for work. And so that's what the Lasnamäe consists of. If we take a look at the exhibition or the division competition itself, then we've received, tons of submissions from pretty much all over the world. We had a jury consisting of Winnie Maas, also Kaidi was in the jury as well, and then Benedetta. Help. Thank you very much. Veronica Valk and Toomas Tammis as well from Estonia. Selected 3 winning entries plus a number of honorable mentions. We're going to see all of those later today. The opening of the exhibition is going to happen during lunch. So when we finish with this panel, grab something quick right here in front, and then we're all going to go to the exhibition opening and then come back for lunch. But let's start with the panel, and now I can sit down probably as well. Maybe I'll go over there and introduce all of our speakers. So, yeah, the presentation is going to run in a second. And I think we can, pretty much roll it, starting now. Here with me, I have Areti and Lydia, the curators of TAB. I don't think they need the introduction anymore. But I would also like to introduce Kaidi, who is the head of the is the architect and urban planner who heads the Spatial Planning Competence Center of the Strategic Management Office of City of Tallinn. Complicated, but basically Kaidi is in charge of the spatial planning of this beautiful city. Is in-house architecture and urban planning practice of City of Tallinn that drafts comprehensive plans and spatial visions for the City of Tallinn, designs public spaces, organizes architectural competitions and things like this. So Kaidi was also the member of the jury during the competition. Then next, Maria. Maria is a community activist in Lasnamäe. She's been involved with, I mean, you live there as well, as far as I know. Yeah, and she's been involved with public life in Lasnamäe for years through the nonprofit called Lasna Idee. And it's a nonprofit organization that unites local enthusiasts to develop their own neighborhood through citizen participation. You stand in community activism with one leg and is engaged in local policy and planning in the other. Maria is also board member and project manager of the Estonian Urban Lab, Linnalabor, where she deals with the popularization in urban education. And then Sonia. Sonia has been involved with the team of TAB. Sonia is actually the person who pretty much compiled the brief for the competition. She's a Master of Landscape Architecture candidate at Harvard GSD. And broadly, your interests, you'll be able to, I won't be reading them because I'm sure we'll touch on them. But yeah, so the presentation is there now. We can start. Basically, I'm not going to show a presentation. What we're going to do is we're just going to loop some slides so you can, follow as we speak. And just to kind of kick off the panel, I would like all of you to have a quick word, maybe like 3-5 words, as to how you see the competition. Were you happy with it? And maybe more specifically, I'll start with Areti and Lydia, with you. What intrigued you about the notion of the MICRORAYON in Lasnamäe, specifically when choosing a site for the competition this year? Because I remember your eyes just lighting up when the word MICRORAYON was mentioned, and you were like, oh yes, let's do this. So can you quickly comment on that?
Yeah. Thank you, Ivan, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are ignorant of the specificities of Tallinn, but we were asked as part of the Biennale events to choose a site, and we're very much interested to find a place that makes sense to use it as a competition site, not for the sake of the competition, but for understanding and finding a place that has big problematics and that the competition could serve as something that the authorities could take into consideration. Also, with Ivan, we have been through different kind of possibilities and case studies. And when we saw Lasnamäe, we were very much thrilled because this idea of microrayon, this idea of micro-district, resembles lots on the efforts, the contemporary efforts that we're trying to do to create a multi-center city, to create a city that is walkable, a city that is accessible, a city that has lots of public space. I come from Barcelona. They are, as part of the mobility plan in Barcelona, they are working a lot in this idea of the super block. So merging 9 urban blocks and redirecting the mobility in the periphery of the block. So all of a sudden, 70% of the interior of the block that was devoted to cars all of a sudden is becoming public space. So there are lots of a lot of contemporary, let's say, efforts on trying to rethink the scale of the urban district, and that was also something, the scale of the urban block, and that was also something that we wanted to do with the competition. Let's say, taking the idea of edible into the scale of the urban district, the urban block, and also into a real case of Tallinn. So I think that it was a great challenge for us to see how that idea that has been conceived in a different moment, in a different political moment, environmental moment, how could that be rethought as a mechanism, as a typology that would allow for, a self-sufficient district in terms of resources, an accessible district in terms of public space, an inclusive district in terms of building up upon the existing communities or communities participating in the regeneration of that, no? And what would it mean to implement the metabolic processes that we have seen in the exhibition into an urban scale? So that was a real challenge, and we were surprised by the different approaches that you will see during the exhibition. There is a variation of proposals, and there is a variation also in the winning entries. So we will have the possibility to visit that during the break.
Yes, thank you. Lydia.
I'll add to your question why our eyes lit up when we discovered the notion of the microrayon. And I just want to give a little brief, story of the origin of how this project emerged. When we started to develop this competition, it was during the pandemic when we were all contained and we were not allowed to walk in different districts. So, it was a very critical moment where this kind of confinement made you know your neighbors better or understand who is next door and try to kind of recreate your life based on a local self-sufficiency in many ways or form. And during that time, I remember we had many discussions with Areti about the 15-minute city, which was an idea of Carlo Moreno's, who's an academic in Paris at the Sorbonne, which was popularized by Anne Hidalgo, which was the mayor of Paris, that within 15 minutes, you should have all the resources that you need to sustain life, not only life in terms of survival, but also livelihood, communication, conviviality, and so forth. So the microrayon was very interesting to us as a kind of historical artifact of what it meant for the development of the Soviet Union and what the collapse of this meant as well, the failure of that aspect. And we have the remnants of a space which was the collapse of that notion, but at the same time, the same notion of the microrayon was, resurging in a very powerful way throughout the pandemic. So with the circular block competition, we were interested both in the failure of this kind of utopian socialist idea of the space, but also the resurgence because of the pandemic, and interested in how, what is the space that can be, reinvented within these kind of remnants, this the kind of neighborhood that fell apart. I mean, I'm not a resident of the Las Namai, so if I'm saying something that sounds wrong, please correct me. But we were very much interested in creating, regenerating resources, and not just as a technical matter, but as a question of creating new social relations and new ways of livelihood and collaboration between the residents. And I'll pass on the microphone to Sonia Ralston, who's the assistant curator of the Biennale. We owe her a great debt of gratitude, and she was very instrumental in developing in putting together the competition. She looked in archives from the moment that the project was launched as a utopian project. She researched, so maybe I'll pass on the mic to you.
I think it works. It works, okay. Yes, thank you, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to meet both of you in person. Well, actually, all three of you in person for the first time. I think just to maybe echo some of the things that were interesting about Las Namai, I've long been interested in Estonian architecture and the history and how a lot of kinds of experiments were happening in the late Soviet period that resulted in lots of kind of dissident opportunities. So I think when I was looking at Las Namai, I was really excited to dig a little deeper into it, and I've come across your organization before. They do really beautiful work, but I think what I was maybe the easiest way to kind of enter it is that I'm from Canada, and so some of the some of these kinds of districts that are big planned modernist blocks, like these are all over the world, and a lot of them face problems of disinvestment or stigmatization, racism, xenophobia are very common reasons that a lot of these places have a really negative association. But I think maybe what's most interesting about Lasnamäe is that the kind of decision to not finish it was a dissident act in itself. It was a rejection of a kind of a history that they didn't want to be associated with, but it's in some ways has caused a lot of issues. But I think it leads to a lot of really interesting opportunities. So I was really taken with the project that Anne Press and Andrea Tam did as their project for their master's project, which is Urban Barley Field. And it was kind of an opportunity to reimagine certain parts of the unfinished corridors in Lasnamäe as a kind of new space that was supportive of these kinds of principles of metabolism, but also community development. And I think maybe as a final word is that there's a lot of stigmatization about the area, and I'm sure that you can talk more about this, but I think I was reading recently an essay by Anders Kurg about Lasnamäe and talking about the documentary that Mark Sosar did about Malin Milak, who's one of the architects, and she was saying, well, it's a city, it's like anywhere else. People want to live there even though there are problems. So there's just ways to kind of move forward. And I think this vision competition provided an opportunity to think of ways to move forward beyond what the work that the city and community organizations are already doing. So, yeah.
All right, thanks. I'll maybe now ask Kaidi. I'll ask you, as a city official responsible for developing Tallinn strategy, I mean, how do you see Lasnamäe? I mean, it being the largest housing district in Tallinn, obviously a quarter of the population, is a big deal. But at the same time, it does have a certain renommee that you can generate questions with it. So how do you see Lasnamäe in the context of Tallinn's future development? What are the city's plans? And as Areti said, one of the reasons we wanted to do the competition in Lasnamäe specifically was because we wanted it to be somehow useful, because TAB does want to be involved in the local scene. We do want to generate things that actually, you can use. So if you could comment on that as well, that would be great. What did you think of the winning entries? Can the city use, not just specifically this particular competition, but let's say competitions or these kind of actions in the future?
Hello. Let's talk about the future plans of Lasnamäe then. And as you mentioned, it's actually quite tricky to talk about Lasnamäe in general because this overall perception of Lasnamäe is so stigmatized. The vast majority of Estonian architects and urban planners see it as a completely failed space regarding urban planning, regarding the building stock that is morally outdated, and the actual virtues and actual values of Lasnamäe are much less spoken about. And that's why I think that having this competition on Lasnamäe is actually very beneficial in the wider context of city planning, bringing in these fresh ideas from other parts of the world, from people who might have a fresh viewpoint. So I think that the most important thing that we have to do now is start talking about the values of Lasnamäe more, and there are actually plenty. For example, the natural environment of it, which is very biodiverse, the meadowlands. Also the general spaciousness of it. What is very characteristic to the city of Tallinn is that almost 90% of the land in Tallinn is privately owned. So we do not have so much to play around with as a municipality. But Lasnamäe is an exception to that. We have actually quite a lot of land in Lasnamäe, which should give the local municipality the courage and ideas to be more brave when designing new concepts or proposing new typologies. And if you ask me what lies ahead for Lasnamäe, I would say that the two most important keywords actually resonate with this vision competition context quite well, and I think they are totally new functionalities and completely new materiality. And let me elaborate on that maybe a little bit. By new functionalities, I think personally that although Lasnamäe is the city unfinished, we don't necessarily have to finish it. We don't have to finish it according to the plan that originally was, because the overall context has changed so much. But because we have so much vacant land, and the inhabitants of Lasnamäe actually welcome brave new ideas quite well, I think Lasnamäe could be possibly a very good testing ground for anything innovative. And the development around Ülemiste city actually shows it already. And the other thing, the other important keyword is materiality. And for those who are not local, might not know, but it's actually, you could say that it's kind of a thing in Tallinn architecture that you define the quality of space by materiality. For example, Kalamaja, which is the most popular living district in Tallinn, is very much defined by being a wooden district, for example. And I feel like the materials in Lasnamäe are quite valuable. The clint, the meadowlands. So also in the context of this energy crisis and all climate crisis, we should take this approach that we should start recycling Lasnamäe as a material as well.
Okay, good. There are so many things that you're picking or like pointing out that I would love to come back to, but I do want to make it to Maria. As you have been involved with Lasnamäe in a very hands-on, like literally hands-on fashion via the Lasna-idee. What has changed in Lasnamäe over the years? What keeps you motivated?
Hello Hello, thank you. Hello from me as well. Yes, a lot has happened, and also we happened. In 2014, now 8 years ago, we started our NGO together with like-minded people from Lasnamäe that I didn't previously knew about. So it wasn't an NGO of previously known friends, and what bothered us was exactly this negative stereotype, because we saw a lot of values in our own living space, and we wanted to break those stereotypes and show positive aspects. And actually, I see that they are valued now, and also from city officials. The microrayon itself is more known. We talk more about it in this way. In Estonian, we use word asum more and more in terms of Lasnamäe as well. Previously, this word has been used about Kalamaja and other hip, cool districts, but not thinking that the same kind of smaller districts exist in Lasnamäe as well and have their own purpose in terms of exactly this 15-minute city. We already have available services present in this microrayon, and in this way, Lasnamäe was not finished, but in some way we still have those existing first ideas present there. And also what I'm really happy about is that one of really strong initial ideas of planners who did this master plan of Lasnamäe was this great green belt going throughout the whole Lasnamäe, which is an amazing idea, is now brought out again by the city. And this is something that has been kind of a silent value. And also residents thought that, oh, it's just unfinished land and it's going to be built, but actually it's a very ecologically valuable space that is going to be with a new concept soon, right? And already starting. So this is has been changing. What else in terms of kind of topic of edible? The topic of the competition and also the Architecture Biennale itself. We prototyped a lot of different ideas how to bring people together in Lasnamäe and how to make them think that they can also bring changes about that it could happen bottom up. Because it has been not only a stereotype, but also a mindset of residents themselves that they somehow are powerless to do something positive in their neighborhood, that it's always top down, because also it was planned really much top down, right? So we did a lot of different events, cinema, open air cinemas and cultural stuff. But what really made a change was actually the idea of a community garden, of growing something together, to grow it yourself. And it made a change because if you think about an event, it brings people together, it's very visible, it's like a fireworks. But fireworks just end and people forget. But if you grow something, you have to take care of it. It's a long-term project and it really brings people together. And when we started this idea, we had a lot of skepticism that it's not possible in Lasnamäe, it might be possible in Kalamaja because people are more aware there. That it's unsafe because food in the city is something that is not suitable, and that people will not be interested. Well, we proved it wrong because now we just yesterday celebrated 5 years of the community garden we built in Lasnamäe. We have over 100 people going there regularly. And not only that it's a locally important place now, but we managed to kind of start a movement of community garden development in all over Tallinn. So I really much agree with Kaidi that Lasnamäe is a really important and really good testing ground. If it's possible in Lasnamäe, it's possible anywhere in Tallinn because you have all those kind of negative impacts that you think, oh, it's not possible. But then you see, well, people are interested. And in that sense, I think all the ideas about food production, about growing food in the city and in Lasnamäe is very, very relevant. And I personally see that this interest is also growing itself. Every year we have new people coming in, and we even can't host them anymore in this one small community garden. So I think that the vision competition really helps us to think further how we can develop this very positive experience and to really grow it itself. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, all of you. I do have to say that it's not a monologue by us to you. It is a dialogue. At least this particular panel, I think, wouldn't make sense without the participation of all of you guys. So please, if you have questions, if you want to add something, if you live in Lasnamäe and you disagree with whatever, then just raise your hand, let us know what you think, right? And we'll be on the lookout for the hands. And also the same applies to the panelists. But one of the things, maybe going a little bit of an tangent. Areti, did you want to say, already comment on something?
No, you need a mic. Yeah, no, you can go ahead. I was just thinking that maybe it would be nice to very quickly at least describe the winning project. Because I think, or was it part of your questions?
Well, I mean, we can describe the winning project. Yeah, why not? Actually, I was thinking about it when Kaidi was saying that we need to recycle Lasnamäe, and then I thought, yeah, that's exactly what the winning proposal sort of tries to do. It decomposes one part of it, and then it does something new instead. But if you want to do that, please go ahead.
Can we do it? Because I think that they will.
Of course, let's do it then. As I said, it's an.
Are we allowed to speak about the winning project? Because I think there is a ceremony afterwards or something. No, I mean, only one thing I want to mention about the winning project is the fact that what becomes interesting in this kind of urban environments, socially, architecturally, environmentally complex, is this new idea of also following the rhythm of what is the context, no? And the winning proposal is very much about connecting with the rhythm of the forest which surrounds the area. So it's not about regenerating or rebuilding or continuing a plan in the traditional way that we plan a city or we construct urban environment. It's really a proposal about a radical new way of thinking how certain built space could continue to grow. Following the rhythm of the forest and the material and the resource that the forest could give with its own rhythm, it actually feeds into how we build, into what kind of time cycles we have about building. And I think that this is really, really crucial because it actually highlights this necessity of synchronizing the way that we live with everything that surrounds us in a kind of a more symbiotic relationship rather than in a kind of a violating approach or extractive approach on how we go to land, how we bring resources inland, and how we use these resources to build up. And I think that this is really something that won, let's say, it gained our attention from the winning entries. And
yeah, we really loved the way that the project was built on the premise of different timescales, but also how it saw the decomposition of a part of Lasnamäe as the forest was growing. It was recomposing itself. So we will show you these projects right after this talk, but I just wanted to also add something to what Maria was saying before, and of course, we are the aliens here, right, in Lasnamäe. You're so imbued and ingrained in the local culture, and in no way are we perceiving it as a kind of failed space and trying to resurrect it. We actually, I think you are doing part of the work of the Circular Block with your organization. And I wanted to highlight something that I think is very important about the garden and the issue of maintenance and the engagement of communities to sustain these kinds of systems that are connected with buildings. And in this light it touches upon the question of the Biennale, where we understand, if you integrate living systems into the built environment, they need to be taken care of. Just like you take care of a pet, a child, a plant, you need to take care of these kinds of systems as well. But we don't consider this as a question of maintenance, we consider it as a question of care. And I think this is something that we want to foster and help the kind of viewers of the exhibition see that we need a different kind of engagement with the built environment, one where it does not become a kind of inert vessel that surrounds us and shelters us, but where we have to be, where our livelihood, our sustenance needs to be connected on that part. And I think on a very prime level, the gardens do that. They become part of your biorhythm, of your everyday activity, and your livelihood in many ways or forms. So I think that the fact that it survived is already, showing us that that this needs to happen.
It's actually really interesting, this notion of the garden, because if you remember, then when we started developing the concept for the competition, one of the things that came up was a dacha. Yeah, so I don't know, raise a hand who knows what dacha is. Okay, there are enough of you. Good. Tell your neighbor. But basically, a dacha is it's a tiny piece of land, an allotment back in the Soviet times. Yeah, well, it's a summer house, but it's more a plot of land, and you can do whatever you want with that plot of land. It used to be divided between the workers. Let's say a company back in the Soviet Union would own a large piece of land. It would subdivide it into tiny, tiny lots, and we're talking tiny, like 10, I don't know, by 20 meters or maybe like even less, and then they would distribute them between the workers, and then the workers of that particular company would be free to do whatever they want with that particular piece of land. So they would the typical Soviet, let's say, lifestyle would be you work, then you live in a block like that, and then you have the dacha. The dacha is where you really like live out your dreams and passions. And when we started kind of trying to ground the vision competition into the realities of Estonia and Tallinn, that was one of the things we were thinking, that why don't we experiment with that too? But then, we ended up going for Lasnamäe. But what is fun with dachas is that people do them, or they keep the dachas, they grow their own stuff, but they don't perceive it as being sustainable, or they don't perceive it as being something that we're all here trying to promote. how do we breach that gap of understanding? Or, they think it's uncool to have a dacha, for example. The youngsters well, now it's changed. Back in the day when I was growing up as a kid, dacha was like something your grandparents do. By now we have young people actually, participating in these kind of guerrilla dacha or guerrilla gardening campaigns. So maybe, Maria, you could pick up on this and develop it further. Like the dacha, the growing your own stuff, sustainability aspect.
Yes, well, when we started, my expectation was that probably the people who will join our movement or idea will be someone like my age who is kind of aware about the ideas. But at the end, actually, the most typical user was family with small children. And for them, the value, and we also asked, like, why do you come here? Is it because you see that it's ecological, that you see it's a fun thing to do, you want to learn about gardening? And for most of the people, those young families, it was, I want to show my child how his food is grown, that he learns responsibility. And also it was a really good alternative to a children's playground because they go crazy in their playground, they become hyperactive, and that's how they explained. I have no children of my own, but it was really a place for them for recreation and to learn or to teach their children patience and really this responsibility. And it was kind of ecological aspect, but they didn't phrase it in this way. At the end, of course, it is, but we don't really have to say it, oh, now you're ecological, for them to really practice ecological values. So it was a different aspect, and it was an interesting realization also for me. So yes, we have young people who do it for ecological reasons, but there are also quite a lot of elderly who really say, I used to own a dacha, but I'm too old to go there. I have no one to take me there, but I really want to continue this hobby. And also it's a place for socialization, so finding really friends and not being lonely. And it's really relevant, and it was really relevant during pandemic as well. So at the end, we don't have to really call it in this way. We can just find other aspects.
No, I completely agree. It's just I always find it funny because you're trying to talk, in my current job as the coordinator of the Just Transition Fund, which has to do with climate policy, climate neutrality, and restructuring economic and social affairs of a certain region in Estonia to kind of be more in line with the climate targets. You try to explain those things, those difficult concepts to people, and they don't get it. And then when you talk about dacha, when you go out in the dacha, then immediately everybody understands what we're trying to do. We're trying to accomplish a better world where, where we as a species can survive, essentially, what we're talking about. But this aspect of meeting your neighbor too, Lasnamäe was not particularly known for being very friendly or knowing your neighbor. Sometimes you didn't want to know your neighbor. And in this sense, this is really funny what you're saying, that in case of the pandemic, that actually showed how you can deal with that in Lasnamäe.
But yeah, I think the idea of a garden or public garden, it's very flexible. You can go there and take care of the plants without talking to anyone if you don't want to, but you can find friends again if you want to. But it's not a compulsory. It has to be flexible, and people do have different interests, and that's the value of it. So I have seen people, we have one example of a local person who saw from his balcony what we were doing. At one day he just came and started grilling for us, like food and providing food for us. And he didn't want to grow anything, and he didn't want to be kind of involved in a community in that way. He was in that sort of way kind of introvert, but he wanted to kind of do his part.
Participate.
And now, last year, or actually as this year, he finally started to grow himself and post stuff on Facebook, what he didn't do previously. So it takes sometimes time for people to open up and to think that, well, I actually can learn something and I could find some new experiences. So it develops in its own.
It's interesting to me that we have this really hands-on, really kind of personal aspect in this whole topic, but we also have the more strategic, let's say, we're talking about the MICRORAYON, and most of the works that were submitted for the vision competition did not deal with, planting your own flowers. They were looking at the thing in a systemic way. They were trying to address the system rather than just, tweaking it a tiny bit. So maybe, I don't know, maybe Areti and Lydia, you could comment on, how do we bridge the gap, essentially, between the strategy and the very hands-on, the very human, very individual aspects of the topic?
Yeah, I was actually thinking exactly the same, so I'm very happy that you did that question, because I mean, one of our main concerns was how we, work on these future urban districts from the bottom up, like including the community. How can we facilitate processes of design or planning that could be much more collaborative and participatory, and it's great to have people being interested in participating in taking decisions for the place that they will inhabit. But we also need not to be naive, in the sense that if we are talking about a positive impact in the planet in relation to, food production, food scarcity, food injustice, energy generation, local productivity, we also need to have a plan. And that plan starts from the top towards down, not in the sense of hierarchical thinking, but in the sense of having different kind of experts that they need to plan and to create a strategy. So that combination of top-down planning and policies necessary for many of these things to be implemented, and the bottom-up processes of understanding the needs, the desires of the communities, how these could become qualitative data, not just quantitative data, qualitative data that they could inform that kind of planning and strategy, is really fundamental. And that is not an easy task, no? That is not an easy task. It requires lots of stakeholders to come together. It requires a lot of negotiation. Not everybody is able to negotiate, because not everybody is a diplomat or a politician, so that's not always an easy thing to do with the communities. I have personally worked in a lot of projects that include participatory design processes, and that's not always easy, but I think it's fundamental. And we do need to understand that neither one, the bottom up, nor the other, top down, alone, could actually become a solution for the urban scale, the district scale, the community needs.
I'll add to that, and I think we should open it up to the audience after, but I think it's also important to understand that in the vision competition, well, first we address 3 different scales, the scale of the apartment, the scale of the housing block, and the scale of the district, which actually confused people very much. But our intention was to offer different kinds of strategies that can weave in different scales. But one thing that I wanted to highlight is that it's not just about gardening, right? Like we didn't only ask the participants to produce urban gardens, although a lot of the schemes did. It was really about how power regimes are embedded within the way that energy is distributed, within the way that we use urban supply networks, the way that water is distributed. And it really is about how power is distributed in an urban environment, and how we can hack into these systems and possibly generate federated networks that can generate their own energy and provide microgrid environments. And this is just as much a question of ecology, to generate energy, as it is about social space and kind of changing power regimes. So this was very important, and a lot of the schemes, I think, address that in different ways. So we believe in energy decentralization and material decentralization, and this was also as part of the competition. But I did want to say, also, to your earlier point, there was a team that did a dacha project in the Biennale. I don't know if Sim and Sile are here. Yeah, she's here. Maybe she wants to say something about the dacha, and or she will later on in your panel. But maybe we should open also to
Yeah,
the public
absolutely. As we said,
for
it's
further
a
questions.
dialogue. So hands, show me hands. Who has questions or answers or comments? Who wants to argue? I mean, Silly, you would be the easy target now that you've been pointed out. So how about you take the mic and tell us what you think?
I think I hope to have a longer discussion on dacha wraps in tomorrow's panel as well. That's going to be like, I think, around 4 o'clock or something. But I really appreciated the idea of how the greenery and communal activity can actually better the life quality of people. And the way how we approach it, meaning that there's like a lot of touches taken down around Tallinn nowadays, or around Tallinn. The airport area was just recently totally torn down in order to expand the airport. Then we're really looking ways how to integrate that further into city center, or even consider vertical touches that is now also shown there in the main exhibition. And it was funny to give an interview to national TV, or like to television yesterday, and they're like, "You saying dachas inside of the facade? Are you crazy? Can you like spell that again? Are you seriously considering this?" And I'm like, yeah, I think we can totally activate the rooftops, the facades, and it has so much more potential of alternative routes and ways how we perceive space and spatial qualities. And then there's this law in Tallinn that you can actually have a cantilever up to 1 meter on a facade if it's not touching the ground that could be inhabited. And that's why this dacha wrap is exactly 1 meter wide. So we're just trying to find the caps and the potential possibilities in laws and standards of construction to integrate the sort of forgotten qualities of life and embed that there. So I also appreciate a lot what you've been discussing, because it's going in the same direction, how we can hack the existing.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Anybody else? Any hands, please? Being an active audience is a great thing. Don't see anyone? I mean, I guess we need to warm them up a little bit more. Or maybe everybody's just hungry, I'm not sure. But yeah, well, actually...
We can open the competition.
Say again?
I have a question over here.
So, yes?
In the back.
Yep.
You challenged us to ask questions, so I'm responding to the challenge. Giving people agency is a very important part of creating more equitable cities. And I'm wondering if the project, or some of the projects that were done by the students thought about how to not recreate power structures through those dachas, because it becomes an issue who gets one, where it is located, how to get there. For example, where I live, there's a community garden and there's a waiting line that to get a plot that can be for 5 years or so. So that's one question. And the other one is about environment, like temperature, just from curiosity. Like what happens during the winter to those places?
Maria, do you want to pick that one up?
Well, in winter, it's a different vegetation period, and everything sleeps until next spring. So, I mean, the space, what we do in winter, for example, we celebrate Christmas, we do Christmas tree there or something like that, and we still keep the community active. But yeah, in terms of how could these projects be equal to different sociological groups, we don't have this problem at the moment that we somehow happen to discriminate someone because we just don't have space or people are not able to join. I mean, at the moment, it's very inclusive, but I do think that it could be a problem in the future And it has been a discussion of one of the pilot projects that Kaidi is developing with their colleagues, where we could move forward from just a small community garden more towards a dacha kind of typology, like allotment gardening, where we have bigger pieces of land. And if we have a pilot where we have limited amount of these kind of spots, how do we give them out? Like, what are the criteria? Should it be according to income of the families? And yeah, how we can be as a city equal to those conditions. And also, of course, it brings to a question, how do we not gentrify those areas because of the community gardens? Because this could also happen. And yeah, maybe we can't really stop it, but we do have to keep in mind of it. And in that sense, really maybe choose who could have more access and more possibilities for the community garden. Yeah.
Maybe Kaidi, you want to comment quickly?
Yeah, as Maria said, we are taking this community garden project forward. We have already designed an allotment garden, which differs from the community garden in that aspect that community garden usually consists of these like smaller boxes for plants, but in an allotment garden we are going to be giving out plots of land approximately of 20 square meters to like each inhabitant of Tallinn. And the first building permit will be issued in a couple of weeks. This community garden will be in the northern Tallinn district, which is also a panel housing district that needs a bit of like help and transformation. What is really interesting about this project is that people are already lining up for the plots, although we haven't really advertised it yet. But also like how to take this allotment garden concept forward. For example, if you are growing potatoes on a 20 square meter plot, what do you do with them? You have a small apartment in a Soviet block building. Where do you keep the potatoes? Or should we like open a farmer's market next to the community garden? So it's like an ever-growing project, actually.
But that's what we want, right? Ever-growing projects. Areti, I see you, you took the microphone, so.
We do want definitely to activate the space and to create this kind of placemaking, let's say, strategy. But just also to answer in the other part of the question of Sharon, there were a couple of very interesting proposals from the vision competition. And just to clarify that it was not just a student competition, so it was an open competition to all. But there were a couple of very interesting proposals that they were actually proposing first the infrastructure and the means of the necessary infrastructure for this circular block to emerge, no? So an infrastructure about, water circulation, water collection, an infrastructure about energy generation. And it was interesting to see that, for example, technologies of blockchain were proposed as a kind of a new means to allow the communities to manage these resources, no? Rather than decentralized processes or companies that they own certain, access to energy or water or even the economy of the materials for the urban district. It was interesting to see how these technologies were applied in a way that the resources were actually owned by the community and through technologies that they were very much based on transparency, they were able to manage these resources. They were able to manage these resources in a way that they bring benefit to their community or to their local context and their district. And that is another interesting thing, and maybe another way of how certain activities related to resource production, the urban gardening is just one, there are many more, how this could scale up into the micro-district.
We only have a few minutes left, so are there any more questions? I see there's one right there in the back. Could they get the mic, please? Okay, and one in the front. Okay, now we're gonna get going. Good.
Hello.
Hi.
So I just wanted to make a reflection taking back on what Sile was mentioning earlier, and hopefully also that we'll be able to discuss in the panel on Farm and the Species tomorrow afternoon. And this idea or this reflection on the fact that, for example, Sile was saying that the buildings here have the right to have a 1 meter overhang. And what we're often doing is designing policy, and also going back to what Areti was saying earlier about the fact that it's not just a bottom-up action, but it needs to be also a top-down action. How can we rethink policy and maybe change the perspective? Because often policy is designed from a human perspective. How can we rethink policy to be designed from an ecological maybe perspective also, and shape this policy in order to, for example, that space might be able to become a space for the growth of ecology. And I say this in the sense that I think that in this sense, the micro-rayons could be sort of, let's say, a startup or an accelerator space where we can rethink the perspective from which we design a lot of the policy, also in relationship to what was being discussed now about the embedding the water infrastructure, embedding the energy infrastructure. And I think there's a huge opportunity there. And I see that Tallinn is a space where things are, capable of changing, capable of happening. And so I think there's an interesting reflection to make in relationship exactly from the perspective of whose perspective are we designing these urban policies from, and can we integrate more perspectives in the design of these policies? So that's all. I just wanted to make a reflection. I don't know if that's sort of been thought about in this sense or not, but anyways.
Kaidi, do you want to
Kaidi,
comment?
you're going to change all the policies, so it's...
I think actually the city of Tallinn has made a great start regarding the policies, but policies are a long-term document that will show like concrete effects in maybe 5 or 6 years. But what we have done is we have established a climate act, for example. And this strategic development plan called Tallinn 2035. And what the city of Tallinn is already doing as well, and which we have not really talked about yet because it's in a very raw state of things, is this strategic overview of land owned by the municipality and rules of how to use it more effectively to bring both social cohesion, but also in the context of like temporary use of land, for example. So there are quite many great policies that are being worked on right now. And I do really think that they will bring a positive change.
I would really like to comment on the fact that Estonia is a tiny country, as most of you know. Just a little over 1 million people, and direct democracy actually works in this country. So you can participate in a law drafting. You can submit it directly to Riigikogu, which is the parliament in Estonia, by collecting a certain number of signatures, like digital signatures again, blockchain signatures. So in that sense, like in Estonia, at least we're lucky in the sense, or we should be grateful for building the society in such a way where the stratas are not that many. You can, the president was hanging with us yesterday at the exhibition opening, right? So it's quite nice in that sense to test things here in this country, that's for sure. To see how the participatory things work, how you can change policies, and how fast you can do that. Yeah.
But I also think that, or what I would like to share is that actually the district of Lasnamäe receives more investments per person than any other district in Tallinn. But what we need to achieve is spatial quality, because I personally think that Lasnamäe has not been treated well in terms of architectural quality, and I argue that architectural quality does not necessarily have to be more expensive than junk space. We have been designing Lasnamäe as if it is junk space, and we need to rethink this concept. And I think that it doesn't mean that Lasnamäe necessarily needs very big, more investments, but maybe these tactical, very smart changes and implementations.
Well, we only have 1 minute left, essentially, but we had a question over here. I think we're going to take this one. Can we have a microphone, please? Any more questions from the audience? Just to see.
Hi. So,
okay.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
I was just wondering, what are your views on the
desirable population density in these kind of districts, because on the one hand, higher population density is what gives all the positive qualities to a city, and on the other hand, these community gardens and sustainable approaches often try to limit the population density. What are your future visions? Is it more like vertical gardens and vertical dachas like Sille proposes with new technologies, or is it more like trying to make the city small and low and more suburban?
I guess I can try to answer that. So maybe coming from both sides, I'm trained as an architect and I'm also studying landscape architecture. So I think maybe the best way to think about it, and a lot of these different proposals are doing it, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be like a dichotomy, that you can have density and it can also have sustainable approaches, but you can also have low density, it can be sustainable. I think there's just, and maybe also to speak to just the kind of the rest of the theme of the biennial, is that there are a lot of opportunities for spatial practitioners to kind of integrate that together without risking kind of like making everything into a suburb or something like that. So I think that Lasnamäe is like a really good opportunity to think through how do you kind of maintain a density that is appealing to urban life, or not even necessarily just appealing, but like houses a lot of people. Like that's a very tangible need, and make sure that that's something that is done like sustainably, but also equitably, and it's really cognizant of what people's desires are. So yeah, I think this is maybe a good opportunity to go and see what's coming up.
Exactly. I was just about to say that we're now, we're done with this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you everyone.